Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Real-Time Reporting and Bigger Data, Using Technology to Improve Partner Communications. I'm Brian O'Leary, the Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and we want to welcome you to this, which is the third in a series of webinars that we're doing, not to replace, but to bring you the content that we were planning for our annual meeting, initially scheduled in April and then September and now online. We have several sessions that remain. In this month, we have a webinar next week at this time on sustainable publishing, where we need to go. We also are on September 11th doing two different events, a BISG Industry Awards Celebration that will recognize 3 individuals who have contributed to the industry. We're going to be doing that virtually, and then it'll be followed that day by a keynote conversation with Barnes & Noble CEO James Daunt at 3 p.m. I want to thank in particular Bowker for sponsoring not just this event, but all of the webinars that we're bringing to the book publishing community at large free of charge. That their support is critical in our ability to do that, and we really appreciate it. Today's topic actually is a conversation among 3 true experts, Graham Bell, Executive Director of EDItEUR, Noah Genner, who leads BookNet Canada, and Karina Urquhart from BIC, Book Industry Communication, based in the UK. It's not necessarily visible, although if you do committee work, you probably have seen Noah and Graham participating in our work, but I rely really heavily on Graham, Noah, and Karina to both guide us and to help think about what's possible. We BookNet and BIC do things that are similar to what BISG does in the US market, in their own markets, but they've also pioneered some really interesting developments that you'll hear about today. And the same is true of Graham at EDItEUR, which has an international focus and looks literally around the world in the implementation of its standards, which include Onyx and Thema. Today's conversation is actually going to be moderated by Noah Genner, and I'll be working in background to keep everything moving. So I'd like to first welcome Noah and to kick things off.
Thanks, Brian. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us. I'm excited to be speaking with my colleagues again about topics we all love, so that's great. I'm sad I can't be in New York. I love New York in April, which is already gone. I like New York in September, but we'll do this virtually, and I guess it's safer this way. But I do appreciate the opportunity. So without further ado, I'd like to get things started, and I think perhaps we'll start with Karina, and I think the 3 of us are just going to give a little kind of background on. Brian's already introduced who we are, but I think we just want to talk about what our different organizations do in our different marketplaces to facilitate real-time discussion, real-time exchange of information, and just generally how we work in our different spheres of influence. So Karina, maybe we could start with you, and you could just kind of describe what BIC does so that people that aren't familiar can get aware.
Okay, well, first off, I'd just like to say thank you for inviting me to speak at today's event. Like you know, I was looking forward to coming to New York, but sadly events overtook us all. So who are BIC? So BIC is a UK-based membership organisation at the heart of the book industry. And we create standards, best practices and resources that form part of the DNA, I guess, of our industry supply chains. And we help organisations to become more efficient, save money, be less wasteful, etc. We work on behalf of our members and also the industry at large, and we have 5 committees looking at various aspects of the book industry supply chain, and they are digital, metadata, physical supply chain and libraries. Each committee is responsible for the successful running of various projects and initiatives that they are in charge of, and we host UK national groups for both the Onyx for both Onyx and Thema, and we run comprehensive training courses, a comprehensive training program, and we also host numerous industry events, including most recently a series of online BIC brunches. So that's us in a nutshell, really. I could go on and on, but I won't.
I think that That's great. Thanks, Karina. And
Okay.
I'm sure that people can visit the website and get lots of information.
Yes.
I'm gonna push visiting to definitely look at the real-time stuff that's on the BIC website.
All
but we'll
right.
get to that. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Graham, maybe I think a lot of people are familiar with EDItEUR from other BISG events and with you from taking part in committee work that you do with BISG. But maybe you could just give a little more background on how EDItEUR operates and how you operate in this kind of data exchange globally.
Okay. Well, EDItEUR, we work globally to develop standards for the book trade. Now, I genuinely do mean that, the global book trade, not just any one country. We develop standards that can be applied anywhere. They're intended to be used everywhere. Standards like Onyx and Thema that you've already mentioned, but also other standards as well. And they are designed to work for domestic and international trade. And those standards are there to help solve business problems. The role of EDItEUR is quite distinct from that of BIC or indeed from BISG. Although BIC and EDItEUR actually do have a common history, they were founded by the same person and in fact for many years operated out of the same building. The relationship that we have with BIC is in fact the same as the relationship that we have with BISG, with BookNet Canada, or indeed with MVB in Germany or the JPO in Japan. It is a relationship that those trade associations around the world, I think of it as, think global, act local. We try to develop standards that are applicable to as many people as possible. And those organizations help us with getting those standards implemented. But they also help us in steering the development of those standards in the future. It's very much a symbiotic relationship. And I want to say from the outset that developing standards goes well beyond just sort of listing metadata attributes and thinking up XML tags. We talk a lot about, in fact, that's the easy bit. We talk a lot about develop, support, and promote. It sort of sits somewhere in our mission statement. You need to support standards to make sure that there's in-depth training available, that there's documentation available. You need to go much further than just creating the standard, and that's what we do. So often we're delivering technical support or technical help, we're delivering training and so on. And that contact with the stakeholders is sometimes direct, but more often mediated through organizations like BISG, like BIC, and indeed like BookNet Canada.
Great, thanks, Graham. Well, I know that we appreciate the global nature of EDItEUR being a national organization. It really helps us understand what's going on with discussions like this, and more importantly, in the standards development that is going to make things easier, we hope, for everyone globally in the global world and economy. So appreciate that. So before we move on to some further questions, I thought maybe I should mention why I'm here and BookNet's role in Canada specifically, and
I was going to ask.
Yeah, and how we've been involved. So I'll do that. Being I guess the young organization on the block, much like Canada, we came to the game a little bit later than BISG, EDItEUR, and BIC for sure, which was good because we got to build on the blocks that had already been put in place by other organizations. So we borrowed liberally from others to jumpstart our organization and to jumpstart the discussion here in Canada. And so we've continued to build on those and wherever possible to share back knowledge and expertise to facilitate these discussions that we're having like this today. So we run BookNet Canada as an organization, operates very similarly as Brian has already mentioned and Karina and Graham have mentioned. In the standards area here in Canada, we run committees, bibliographic committees, EDI committees, both domestically and then take part in the international committees whenever we possibly can. We also run services here for the Canadian marketplace. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that throughout the discussions here today, but we run the sales tracking service for Canada. We now run a library tracking service for Canada. We run a bibliographic aggregation and distribution service for Canada, and we run e-catalog service here for Canada. So those are sales data, library data, BiblioShare, and Catalyst in order. And so we run those services here for the Canadian marketplace and integrate them into international services whenever we can. So we take advantage of the standards that have been developed and participate in those areas a lot. Almost all of our work is built on foundations of Onyx or EDI messaging, or even some sales data transaction messaging, where we can take advantage of standards to jumpstart things that that we need to build for our marketplace to take advantage of. So we're hugely interested in the continued development of standards. It makes things easier for us, and it makes things easier for our marketplace. And then it makes things easy for our marketplace to integrate into the global sphere through things like EDItEUR and what Graham's brought up. So to get into the kind of the real-time nature of this, some of the messages that, some of the information and foundations that BookNet's take advantage of over the years have been developed by BIC. And BIC has launched, I think it was about 10 years ago, I'm not sure of the time, some APIs, which they're now calling real-time data exchange messages. And these range from bibliographic data exchange to EDI, to sales, to returns. Brian's showing a slide of some of that information now. So Karina, maybe you could kind of just give us a little bit of an overview of what the messaging is, how it was developed, and how long it's been around, and how many people are taking advantage of it, I guess.
Yes, of course. What we know now as BIC Real-Time did indeed begin a long time ago, as you say, and it was as a result of a request from our members, or several requests from our members, in response to needing a more immediate way of communicating product and transactional information. So EDI, that's not to take anything away from EDI. EDI has and continues to do so, has benefited the book industry for many years, with several messages, including, purchase orders, order response, credit notes, invoices, and returns as well. But it's generally a batch method of communication, so it's not necessarily immediate. And our membership was telling us that they really wanted to exchange additional information faster in real time, so it was as accurate and as up to date as possible. So with all of that in mind, I think it was about 10 years ago, maybe even more, we assembled a working group of industry experts who put together a suite of web services, and there was about 10 messages initially, and so they sort of worked away in the background for a period of time. And then a few years ago, we reviewed that original suite of web services. We updated them, we added many additional message pairs, and we created a separate set for the library sector, which is now known as BIC Real-Time for Libraries, because previously I think both of the library messages and the trade messages were in the same suite. So there was enough difference, we felt, at that time when we reviewed those messages to actually assign a separate suite of messages to the library sector. So that's what we did. And now we're able to offer the industry free to use suite of XML messages or APIs, covering all the main requirements of transactional and informational data. So there's 18 message pairs altogether. So we added 8, and we refined and updated the other 10. And then we added, I think it's about 8 or 10 for the library sector. But the trade ones cover things such as product metadata, ordering, financial documents, returns, consumer direct fulfillment, and the BIC Real-Time for Libraries messages cover the areas of product metadata and ordering. So I have summarized there. Within each of those sections, there are various messages, or message pairs, I should say, that just enable a faster, responsive way of communicating between trading partners. I should say as well that both sets of messages, so both BIC Real-Time and BIC Real-Time for Libraries, are now governed by 2 review groups, and they meet every 9 months or so, or however often we feel is deemed necessary to review the standard and to update it, and keep track of developments, etc. So that's it in a nutshell. There's a lot more information on our website. There's a big bite on both the BIC Real-Time and BIC Real-Time for Libraries. You can sign up for a implementation guide should you wish. We're very happy to send that to you. You can sign up for both. Yeah, so a lot more information on the links, I think, that are being shared at the moment. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Karina,
but that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Because I'm sure people on the call are curious, what's the implementation landscape look like for these APIs in the UK, for instance? I know that you have working groups and there are people that feed back information,
yeah,
including BookNet has fed back information in the past. Is it really widespread? Is it just a few people? And I know it's going to be different for different message bearers and things like that, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. So it's not as widespread as we would like, but then to touch on something Graham said earlier, a lot of the work we do is about, we create the standards, we listen to the requests from our members, we respond with a standard or a set of best practices, and then probably an equally large part of our role is to follow that through and see it through to implementation, encourage adoption across the industry. So it's not as widespread as we would like, and there is a proliferation of proprietary APIs out there as well. But you know, the advantage of BIC Real-Time is that the work's already done, barring the implementation, which is minimal, I believe, compared to, say, for example, an EDI implementation. And yeah, so we often have sort of marketing sessions where we look at how can we encourage others to adopt. I think at the moment we have a number of retailers, wholesaler, data aggregator, I think, who's actually using one of the BIC Real-Time for library messages as well. So, and we have lots of encouraging noises from other areas. I sent out a mini survey a couple of weeks ago to establish what the take up and interest was like amongst those organizations that had asked for an implementation guide, and it's generally positive, but the biggest thing at the moment seems to be finding time to implement, and I think with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, that's probably understandable. But yeah, so we're working hard to encourage adoption throughout the UK.
I can imagine, for instance, BookNet has implemented the product, the real-time, a version of the real-time product metadata API here in Canada. And so we have that available. We have people using it here. We have people using it, and sometimes we don't even know they're using it. So I imagine there's some of that going on in the UK.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah. But I know that last year here in Canada, we gave out 65 million real-time messages of product metadata based on ISBN queries to our database, real-time.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so 65 million. Craig Riggs, who was on the BISG webinar last week, some of his platforms use our APIs, which are BIC real-time APIs. He probably doesn't even know that, or I'm not sure if he does, but there will be people that are using those. So we've implemented those in our ecosystem here. We have people connecting from 49th Shelf, which was brought up last week, but we have POS vendors, we have libraries connecting, we have lots of service providers, we have lots of publishers who are actually giving the data to us, giving us their metadata and getting it back through the real-time to drive their websites, because it's easier to integrate that real-time API than it is to build something off even their own website. So there's a return there that sometimes I think isn't even completely transparent to people. So we would love to see more of them.
Definitely talk, Noah.
Yeah, well, we use them. We use them, and again, I think that people don't even, or variations of them. And we've developed some of our own as well to deliver things like assets, like tables of contents and things that we pull out of the Onyx messages and serve up as separate kind of APIs because they're easier to integrate sometimes than the full Onyx message. So I think they're really, really valuable. I think they have a lot of potential, and we'd love to see more people go. And I think in this, you've already brought it up, Karina, but I think in this climate, as you know, bookstores, libraries need to be more responsive and do things quicker. I think there's some real potential both in the US market and in elsewhere to take advantage of them and to feed back more information so we can make them more and more robust, which is what we always want to do on these kinds of things. I know that, Graham, I know that a lot of the real-time information, obviously the Onyx metadata message that the real-time BIC services deliver is based on Onyx. I know a lot of the kind of fundamentals ideas of Onyx, of information exchange were kind of built on a bedrock of Onyx and EDItEUR. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how EDItEUR has been involved in those areas as well.
Yeah, okay. At the beginning, I think you said, or Brian said, that many people will have heard of EDItEUR because of Onyx and because of Thema. And our third family of standards, I suppose, is called EDItEUR. Now, EDItEUR is much less well known than Onyx or Thema. As you said, however, it forms some of the underpinnings of BIC real-time. And this is how it kind of came about. EDItEUR and Onyx are all about batch exchanges of data. You send a big chunk of data, maybe overnight, and EDI, as Karina mentioned, is somewhat similar. EDItEUR was aimed at that batch exchange of data market. It was aimed at automating routine business transactions, things like orders, invoices, dispatch notes. Now, immediately you think, well, don't we use EDI for those? Yes, you do. Traditionally, and I guess by that I mean anytime since the 1980s, these functions were all done in the EDI. There are global standards for EDI called EDIFACT, and there are local variations. In the UK, the local variation is called Tradecoms. In the US, slightly different, but you have X12. And the suite of X12 messages is a superset of what EDI Tradecoms does. The thing about those EDI messages and the fact that they go back nearly 40 years means they are incredibly limited. They are relatively inflexible and they're quite hard to implement, particularly in what you might call modern technology. They were not designed in the days of the web. They are not web services. They are about fixed format messages that fly back and forth, often overnight. Now, because they are somewhat restricted and inflexible, and I should say X12 is much less inflexible, as the book trade at the same time has become more complex, different pricing models, different types of products, digital stuff, and so on. And those restrictions in the messages are gradually becoming more problematic. So going back to 2004, EDItEUR took some of the ideas of Onyx and XML and developed an XML potential replacement for those EDI messages. And that's what EDItEUR is. They are XML-based replacements for those EDI messages. In fact, Brian and I spoke about these EDItEUR messages and X12 and Tradecoms and so on in a recent BISG webinar called Optimizing Supply Chain Communication. I'm pretty sure it was on June the 30th, and you can certainly watch a recording of that. If you go to the BISG website, there's a menu item called Watch Past Webinars, and you can find Optimizing Supply Chain Communication there. Now, EDItEUR messages, as I've said, are XML messages, a bit like Onyx, but they mirror and extend Tradecoms and X12 messages. They were designed around about 2004. They were updated 2007, 2009. They were then incorporated as the kind of inner heart of some of the BIC real-time messages. So some of the BIC real-time messages, most of the original group, are kind of XML in the middle and with a wrapper around it that makes it possible to interact in real time, to interact, send a message and get a reply back immediately, not having to wait overnight. So those messages, a bit like Onyx, they're designed around XML. Most recently, say since 2017, we've been looking at them again, updating them, and putting time into bringing them into line with Onyx. And what I mean by that is sharing semantics, sharing meaning. Some of the XML tags are used both in Onyx and in XML in EDItEUR. And we've been integrating the code lists together as well. So some, but not all of the code lists from EDItEUR and Onyx are shared. Now, I said right at the beginning that most of EDItEUR is about transactions, those business exchanges like an order acknowledgement, a goods shipped note, eventually a goods received confirmation, an invoice and a payment confirmation, those sorts of pairs of transactions. There are a couple of messages that don't fall into that category. They're not transactional, they're exceptions, and those are reporting messages, business reporting messages. One of those is a sales and sales tax report. Another of those is an inventory, including a digital inventory report. So bookstores, sellers, wholesalers, they can actually report on their sales, report on their inventory back to distributor or back to the publisher. So they're the non-transactional side of EDItEUR. That hasn't been adopted into real time yet, but I think it probably will be at some point. And the two go together. Again, they're symbiotic.
I think that inventory one is could be huge. I know as an organization that processes inventory data coming from multiple retail and distribution and wholesale accounts, not having a standardized message across that area has proved to be very difficult. I know it's something we've talked about together and also in other fora with regards to the sales reporting, which you brought up too, Graham. Yeah. That's a pain point that I think many of us feel, and we'd love to see more implementation of that. So.
And some of you will be familiar with the BISG sales and sales tax report. Now that's actually a version of the EDItEUR report, but it's been flattened. So that instead of being based around XML, it's more like a spreadsheet. Now that means it's easier to implement, but that means also it's slightly harder to automate in many cases. It's certainly a little less flexible. And one of the things we've been doing with the EDItEUR sales report is to bring it up to date with Onyx, as I said, and make sure that any product you can advertise in Onyx, and it might have very complicated pricing in Onyx, you need to be able to report on sales and those potentially quite complicated prices. So that's one of the limitations with the old EDI messages. The pricing is very simple. So we're bringing EDItEUR up to date with the complex pricing that you can now do in Onyx to make sure you can report on anything that you can advertise. The same is true of the inventory as well. So that's why it covers digital inventory now too.
Yeah, and I think maybe everyone knows this, but the other thing I think that is really fundamental here across both the BIC real-time messages, EDItEUR, Onyx, is two things that I, from my kind of development and project management standpoint that I think are fascinating, maybe people on the call here too, is that one, they're human readable. We're X12, yeah, human readable-ish. We're X12, only those of us who are really, I don't want to say sick, but deranged can read X12. And then the other side of it is that most of these messages use common code lists or common nomenclature or common lexicons. So when you implement Onyx, you've already implemented some of the stuff you need to do BIC real-time messages or to do EDItEUR somewhere in your systems. And so that's really a huge fundamental leg up to move to the next message or the next step.
And they can be integrated in that sort of iterative way that you suggest. No, you don't need to do everything at once. Just implement a couple of messages that will solve a problem now. The next year, implement another 2 messages. And that way you can do it bit by bit. You don't have to have a massive investment program that does all the 20-odd BIC real-time messages all at once, because just you really don't have time to do that. Take it bite size.
And there's probably some low-hanging fruit for each organization to take advantage of. Inventory may be a perfect example of that. And how many, as a publisher or a supplier, how many inventory feeds, or separate kinds of inventory feeds, are you taking from different retailers, and how much is that costing your organization? I think you have to analyze those kinds of things all the time. Karina, is there, maybe I'll just kind of go back to the BIC real-time stuff again. Is there a reason you think that the UK market may have been the first to kind of come up with these messages and adopt them? Is there something fundamental to the UK market, or is it something that we could take advantage of elsewhere? So
I don't know is the honest answer to that question.
Well,
you'll have to ask our members. I don't know. I think
I don't think there's anything. Sorry, Karina, go on.
No, I was just going to say it kind of ties in the timing of it. I was thinking about this earlier today, and the timing of it seems to sort of match when I was working at Penguin Random House, certainly back in the day, when we first started noticing the impact of digital on the supply chain. So maybe it has some connection to that. I don't know, but the timing would seem to work. But how that's different between the UK and other countries, I don't know, I'm afraid.
I think that's part of it. I think also there's the factors spilling out of the supply chain review in the UK that was carried out at the end of the 1990s.
That's true, yes.
By the company that at that time was called Vista. And they had a fairly wide-ranging review. They produced a couple of white papers. Part of it led to what's called the Industry Returns Initiative, which took a lot of cost out of the UK supply chain because it built controls and automation around the thorny issue of returns. And the other part of that was a recognition that this all gets a lot easier if everybody does it the same way. And it might not be absolutely ideal for each company, but it's good enough for everybody, and in aggregate, it works. And I think that attitude has been quite important, certainly in the early 2000s in the UK. And I'm not saying that attitude is unique to the UK, but it kind of came together with what we were doing, what BIC was doing.
Yes, but again, how that is unique to the UK, I wouldn't like to. I wouldn't like to say.
I think from a Canadian perspective, it's similar to what Graham said. We had a review of the landscape of the publishing and book retail and library landscapes here in Canada, and that we had similar kinds of conclusions here. In that, if we're all working, let's take the areas that are not cultural or creative and move those kind of aside, and and do what Brian often says, which is to take the friction out of that side of things, right? And so a commonality and collaboration was seen as the area to kind of do that, and these kinds of activities were paramount in that discussion. So just to kind of maybe take a slightly different direction, Karina, I know that so now that we have, let's just say we have all these messages, people are trading them. I know that in the UK, you do some certifications, some accreditation of the messages and of the people conveying the messages. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that works in the UK market, and then Graham can kind of pick up on that and talk about how important that is elsewhere and across the kind of landscape.
So you're talking about product data accreditation? Yeah. Okay. So at BIC, we have a product data accreditation scheme. It's been running for a number of years now, since 2010, or certainly in its current form.
Earlier than that.
It was earlier than that, but in its current form, it's 2010. And initially, it was set up to encourage publishers to think about and appreciate the contribution that they make by accurate and timely metadata. That contribution, the contribution to their sales, to enable them to demonstrate their commitment to making the data available in the supply chain, and to help them benchmark their performance against their competitors. So how does it work? So each publisher's metadata is measured every month and is tracked against a set of criteria over the course of 12 months. The BIC accreditation panel then meets to review their performance, looking at aggregated performance statistics across or against the scheme's requirements over the past year. And it's important to say that the award is based on a year's worth of performance. So we don't just look at a snapshot of how someone was performing on a particular day. We look at their performance across the full 12 months. There are 3 levels of award, so effectively bronze, silver and gold, and they each have their own minimum requirements. So, and as you would expect, the higher the award is, the harder it is to achieve. The very basic level is very basic. I think there's about 13 compulsory fields, and you can even submit your metadata via an Excel spreadsheet if you wish. And then the gold obviously is more difficult. You have to use Onyx, etc. I won't go into the detail of what all the requirements are because they're about to change. It's about to get a lot harder. Sorry. So I'm trying to think how long ago it was now. Several years ago, we underwent a substantial refresh, and I say several years ago because it took years to refresh this scheme because it was so complicated, and we wanted to make sure we got it right. We wanted to make sure we had stakeholder engagement, that that if we changed the scheme and made it harder, that we would still have support from the industry. Obviously, there's no point creating an accreditation scheme that isn't going to be supported or respected. So we built on the existing scheme, and we added a number of additional minimum requirements against each level of accreditation. Importantly, we made the use of Onyx 3 compulsory for the gold level, and the use of FEMA, the subject classification, compulsory for all levels. And we'll be introducing quality control checks later in 2021. So I don't think I mentioned that this new scheme will be launching, well, we're measuring at the moment. So we're measuring against publishers' performance right now. And we will be hopefully in a position to announce the first set of accreditations in March or April in 2021, once we've got a full year of data. In terms of the scheme that's running at the moment, we have 57 publishers accredited, 14 at basic level, 15 at excellence, and 28 at excellence plus, or the gold level effectively. And of all of those, 84% have been awarded the Onyx 3 badge as well. So that shows, that's a very sort of clear visual image to quickly identify those publishers that are operating using Onyx 3, which is great. And that percentage has gradually increased over years and months, so that's really encouraging to see. Scheme is free, it's open to BIC members and non-members alike. And publishers applying for accreditation don't necessarily have to be UK based, but they must be submitting metadata to UK data aggregators and have published or have scheduled to publish 10 or more titles in the UK. That's it.
I think there's a couple of other points, Karina. It's really important, I think, that the publishers get ongoing feedback about how they're doing. They don't just get a badge at the end of the year, or maybe get nothing. Every month they get a little graph, a set of graphs that illustrates whether or not they're getting better. And if you see the line going up, then it's a good sign for that publisher and gives them a bit of encouragement. I think certification like this is so useful if it's designed and developed in line with the best practices. It really helps because it's a visible evidence of an organization's commitment to their metadata and broadly to a standards-based supply chain. It might be worth saying also, Karina, that you run other certification schemes as well beyond the product metadata, the PDEA scheme. You've got a couple of others as well.
Yeah, just to go back to the product data piece again, it's just what I find really interesting, and certainly being on the other end of it when I worked at Penguin, being in receipt of those reports every month, it really encourages regular housekeeping, if that makes sense. So rather than sort of leaving your metadata for 12 months and thinking, I'm up for review for accreditation, I need to, you know, quickly rectify everything. It's a good way of keeping on top of things. And also to mention, if you did take that approach and try to rectify everything the day before you were up for reaccreditation, you wouldn't be able to, because we look at timing as well is really important. So the timing of your good metadata in relation to the publication date is crucial. So yeah, it just encourages a good approach.
It's making sure that metadata is accurate first, comprehensive, that it covers all of the requirements, and thirdly, timely. There's no good in delivering your metadata 3 weeks after publication. It needs to be there several months before, and you're measuring all of those as part of the accreditation scheme. Noah, don't you run an accreditation scheme as well?
We do, and ours is slightly different than Karina's, although I did start by saying when BookNet started, we borrowed liberally from our fellow organizers here, and we borrowed the certification program from BIC at that time. We borrowed from that quite a lot. Yeah, we've moved, and Graham, to your point about the feedback loop, and Karina's brought up that too, is this, the feedback loop is hugely important, because this isn't a set it once and forget it kind of thing. This is a continuous improvement, continuous loop. And things change, as Karina's put, with publication data and all of the timeliness of the data. But being able to see how you're performing over time, we've found that the visibility of that is hugely important to continuous improvement. And so, you know, giving the feedback loop continually, whether it comes from an aggregator or a retailer who's processing the data, or from an organization like BIC or BookNet that's doing an accreditation or certification scheme, those things are hugely important. And we've moved so that certification is part of our data aggregation service now, so that everyone gets a full report card on every single file they submit, actually, and they can look at that over time, which can sometimes be a lot of information, but it is it's at least there for them to take advantage of.
Yeah.
The great thing about this is it really helps to break through that problem that, you know, the metadata job is rather unglamorous. It's just about plumbing and infrastructure. Yes, it makes the industry as a whole work more efficiently, but it's not that glamorous compared with the rest of publishing. And the more that it can be brought into the light, the more that you can reward those people who are doing a good job, the better.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree too.
And it turns standards into something that's slightly aspirational, that you're looking forward to moving up to the next level, or to getting your gold award in 2 years' time. The certification awards those who aspire, and eventually it signals their achievement to everybody else.
Absolutely.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about, since it's a BISG webinar, BISG session, maybe we could talk a little bit about how the US market could maybe take more advantage of some of the, maybe it's Onyx messages, EDItEUR messages, Onyx 3, those kinds of things, or what do you think that the US market might be able to do to kind of jumpstart some of the activities that we've been discussing here? Maybe I'll start with you, Graham, and then we'll move to Karina, and then me.
Oh, okay. I think that that there's a number of things that you could be taking advantage of, and I don't want to put the UK on a pedestal here, because we fail differently. That's all I'm saying. But the things that work well in this country, our move to Onyx 3 was quicker and earlier than was experienced in the US. On the other hand, the US is perhaps not as far back as Germany. Different countries move at different paces. But the deadlines put in place by Amazon at the end of last year, actually, although that's problematic for some publishers, you've got a lot of work to do and they're kind of against the clock. But I think broadly, that is to the advantage of the industry as a whole, although it may not seem it if you are that one publisher who's working against the clock to implement Onyx 3. Because once everybody has implemented Onyx 3, it then becomes much easier to do other stuff, to improve your Onyx 3, to make sure that you're delivering everything that your business partners need. The move to Onyx 3 is a chance to reevaluate, I guess. I think there's part of the Amazon announcement that got lost in the noise as well. And that was their announced intention to implement a thing called the Onyx Acknowledgement message. Now, everybody's used to sending out their Onyx data, and then the following week they send out some updates, and the week after that they send out more updates, but they never get anything back. There's no reply. Well, there is a reply. We designed it a few years ago, and there are a few implementers, not very many. But what do you want back? You want back confirmation that the people you sent your Onyx to have received it, that they've processed it, that there were no errors, that they've been able to ingest all the data, or perhaps even if it's an aggregator, they've been able to both ingest it and send it out to all of their customers. And the acknowledgement message gives you all that, or it can give you a tale of woe that says you've got a syntax error on line 37. And both of those things are useful to know. I think in the UK as well, we have a current project, a kind of pathfinder project to help publishers implement ISNI, the ISNI. And I know, Noah, this is something dear to your heart as well at BookNet Canada. Adopting ISNI means adopting a unique identifier for each person or each persona, each author, each illustrator, each editor. All the contributors to your books can all get unique numbers that are globally shared. And that means that, for example, a retailer can create author pages with much more reliability than if they just start matching names, because there are many authors who share a name. I think there's 4 active authors in the UK called Andrew Taylor. The example I usually use is Richard Holmes. And now there are 2 Richard Holmeses, but they're also both professors. They're also both historians. They both write for the same publisher and so on. If you just look at the metadata without the ISNI, it's very hard to tell them apart. So retailers' author pages, random mix of books by both Richard Holmeses, you can't tell them apart at all. And in the UK at the moment, we're running a project to try to encourage publishers to put ISNIs into their data, and we're actually taking publishers' data, matching up to ISNIs and giving the ISNIs back at the moment, and that's working well.
I think that, I agree on that one 100%, Graham, and we are looking at similar projects here in Canada related to the ISNI. I think those of us who are service providers and project designers or systems designers look at the ISNI and just our eyes grow big with potential, right? And so being able to cross-link all of that information is just huge, and provides a direct consumer benefit somewhere down the line. And so we see that, and we are looking at similar kind of projects like that. Karina, is there anything that you think you can add from the UK perspective that might help the US?
Yeah, just a few things, just to think about, consider adopting real-time approaches as we just discussed. Quite simply for faster, more accurate information exchanges between the trading partners. hopefully that will then, create a more efficient, accurate supply chain and ultimately reduce wasteful practices, wasteful, just waste, time wastes and money wastes, product waste, etc. Think about implementing EDItEUR sales reporting and have a look too at the inventory management side, because that I think there's a lot of potential there. Also think about adopting or moving some way towards something like IRI, or Industry Returns Initiative. We've seen in the UK how that's reduced, or has a massive impact. It's reduced many costs. I won't say it's eliminated waste from the supply chain, but it's certainly contributed to a huge reduction in waste. And keep an eye on your metadata. Good metadata, as we all know, is good metadata equals increased in sales, or certainly increased discoverability, which is online discoverability at the moment is key. And just a point really to mention that in the UK, BIC in the UK is looking at, or is very close to launching a metadata capabilities directory, which seeks to map out the clues in the name, to map out the capabilities of the metadata, of metadata stakeholders. So if you're a contributor, say you're a publisher and you want to tell us how you handle your metadata, you would fill in a questionnaire, and that data would be aggregated, and we'd be able to report back and share with others, what fields you're using, what fields you're not using, what you want people to send to you, what you don't want them to send to you, etc., etc. The intention isn't to judge. The intention is to get an as-is representation of the state of the nation, if you like, with regards to our metadata. So that's something that might be useful in other territories. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds really valuable. I think that has a lot of potential. Before I hand it back to Brian for questions, well, I'll answer this question too. I partially answered it, the IS&I that Graham mentioned. The focus on Onyx 3. Canada's market is a little bit unique because we're so linked to the US. Much of our systems work and supply chain work is cross-linked between the two countries. So the things that BISG is interested in are also the things that BookNet Canada is interested in. I would like to see those things move forward, Onyx 3.0 and et cetera, and other things like that. One area we haven't spent a bunch of time touching on that I just wanted to, in my last minute, wanted to touch on before we go to questions, was library data, or libraries in general, public libraries. And Karina mentioned the real-time messages that are fascinating that BIC has done for communications back and forth to libraries. And in Canada, in BookNet Canada's case, we've been looking at real-time messaging in a slightly different way with libraries, in that we've started to collect circulation data from public libraries on their physical collections. So once a week, as real-time as that is, we get the circulation and inventory and holds and other information from public libraries by ISBN, catalog number ISBN, sent to us for aggregation, and we aggregate that data and share it back with the Canadian market. So they can look at their titles. Publishers can look at their titles in the context of sales, but they can also see real-time library circulation data for that for their books as well. And we're doing that to try and make a more informed supply chain here. We know that libraries are important for discovery. We know that libraries are important for reading, obviously, and engagement with readers and book buyers. And so we're trying to find ways to quantify that. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up here is there isn't any great standard messaging in that sphere right now. It's something we'd love to work on. It's something Brian and I have talked about, all three of us have talked about, all four of us have talked about in the past. That's something near and dear to our heart. And we think there's a lot of potential there for sharing that information. I know there's some information there, but it's something that we think that if ILS systems and library systems could integrate a little more information there, it might open some transparency that could really help all of us collaborate a little bit more in that area. And with that, Brian,
real insight into the market, not just retail, but also libraries. and builds upon the infrastructure you already had for aggregating all the metadata.
Yeah, it's layers upon layers again, right? So we've already built this this infrastructure, and so we get to leverage it again and again and again for more and more things and standards. And so we've already started to learn things. I know there's the Panorama project in the US, and they're learning similar things. We're learning very similar things just from looking at the data, how important libraries are for backlist, and how you can mine that backlist as a publisher or as a book retailer to find opportunity for your book buyers or your clients, as the case may be. I think there's lots of opportunity there. And Brian, questions?
We have a few.
Okay.
I would start by saying that once a week is better than once a year, and it's certainly a lot better than never. So I think, and I think that there's a certain theme within this conversation today about, walk before you can run. Try to find some way to work together more collaboratively. One question we received from the audience was, the U.S. market's the only one represented in this conversation today that doesn't have an accreditation program. And it sounds like Noah and Karina, you'd both recommend kind of implementing that.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. And but it doesn't have to be one size fits all. I mean, or should it? I mean, I imagine that your two programs are different from one another in ways that reflect the market.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, we spent a lot of time with our working groups, and we canvassed a lot of opinion, which was great, but that's why it took us so long. You might find that you can plug our accreditation scheme into your territory really easily, or you may find that actually 70% of it works, but the other 30% you need to adapt for your own territory. I don't know. It'd be worth having a look at to see what you can share, what you can take from it, or if there are certain areas that need to be changed. I suspect there might be certain areas that would need to be tweaked or changed slightly.
Yeah, the other thing I would add there, Brian, sorry, just quickly is, again, at the walk before you run approach, I think that's a very good point, in that we started very hands-on and moved to a more automated system as we kind of grew up, but we had to start somewhere, and so we started. And the other thing I think I would be remiss being a editor board member and not pointing out is that there are some schemas and RelaxNG schemas that editor has developed. They're free and they're readily available, and they can actually do kind of a basic certification of a file already. And actually you can take those and expand them to build a certification program without a huge investment. It takes a little bit of technical know-how, but some of the underlying work, so you can borrow from BIC, you can borrow from BNC, but there's also some structural stuff that EDItEUR has developed that's available now. So
yeah, that would be our strict schema.
Yeah,
that you're talking about. Yes, and that can look at an Onyx message and say, yes, structurally this is sound, but also you're delivering the important bits of data that the schema can look at your Onyx file and say, yeah, this meets a certain standard. I wouldn't go overboard on that. It can't, for example, do all the things that the UK scheme checks for, but it does a proportion of them and would be a good first step for a lot of publishers.
Yeah, I agree. It would be a good place to start. Definitely. And then see what results you get, see how the performance is, because another thing to highlight is our accreditation scheme. It's all about the carrot and not about the stick. So we want to reward and encourage. We don't want to, put people off or discourage people. So you don't want to make it, I would say, you don't want to make it impossible to achieve. That's one of the reasons we're not putting our quality control checks in place next year until we have a rough idea of how that's going. Because there's enough to contend with in the new scheme, and it may be that the quality control checks are just a step too far at this stage. So I would recommend a sort of a gentle approach at first and see how that goes, and then maybe build on that.
You should get a sense of what's too easy and what's too difficult. Put something in place, and then 2 years later make it slightly harder, and then 2 years after that make it slightly more difficult again. Don't put something in place like, from the outset that nobody can reach the top level of.
Yeah.
Well, not surprisingly to me, we're at time today, and I think that what you have all done today is give the world a taste of what our conversations are like in London and Frankfurt when those things take place. This is a real privilege for me. One of the things that I most enjoy about my role at BISG is the opportunity to work with Noah, Karina, and Graham. I mean, you guys have kind of set standards in your own markets and challenged the world to catch up a little bit. As Graham, you're right that not everything's perfect in any given market, but we all learn from one another, and that's a wonderful thing to be able to say.
Yeah, I mean, I really wish that we had something in the UK that was like 49th Shelf. Craig Riggs' BISG webinar that you did with him about, 10 days, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Which you can still get the recording of. That was quite an inspiring talk for a start. And I thought, why don't we have something for regional literature in the UK like that, to highlight books written by Welsh authors, written by Scottish authors, written by North of England authors. And if you've got the plumbing, this was the point he made, if you have the plumbing there already, then doing those clever things is much easier than if you didn't have the plumbing to start with.
Yeah.
That was the strongest message from his talk, is once you have the plumbing right, everything else is a lot easier. And I'd recommend everybody on this call, if they haven't already listened to that webinar, go away and listen to it. Yeah.
Well, in this case, BookNet Canada has the plumbing, and
Yes.
maybe that's our charge going forward, is for BISG to help the industry, at least in the US market, develop better plumbing. Thanks, guys. This has been really great to our
Thanks,
Graham and Karina. I know it's late in the day. Thanks for making the time. And
no, thank you for inviting me. It's been great.
Talk to you again soon.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.